What drives someone to murder over 600 innocent girls? The answer might be the most twisted motivation in human history: vanity. In the 16th century Hungary, there lived one of Europe's most powerful aristocrats. She was related to kings, controlled vast estates, and commanded hundreds of servants. She had everything wealth could buy, except what she wanted most: eternal youth. So she decided to take it by force. For over 2 decades, this woman systematically tortured and killed young girls, convinced their blood held the secret to stopping time itself. Her servants became accomplices, her castle became a slaughterhouse, and her victims became ingredients in history's most horrific beauty regimen. She believed she could achieve immortal beauty by bathing in virgin blood. Her name was Elizabeth Bathory, and she almost got away with becoming Europe's most twisted serial killer. Elizabeth Bathory was born into privilege in 1560, but her childhood was anything but normal. The Bathory family was Hungarian royalty with a dark reputation. They were known for their cruelty, their political schemes, and their unstable minds. Several family members had already earned reputations as sadistic rulers who enjoyed torturing their subjects. Basically, being horrible was the family business. Young Elizabeth grew up in Exed Castle, surrounded by luxury and violence in equal measure. Her family didn't just rule their lands, they terrorized them. Public executions were entertainment, torture was justice, and cruelty was considered strength. The Bathorys took brutality to another level entirely. At age 11, Elizabeth was engaged to Ferenc Nadasdy, a Hungarian military commander known as the Black Knight. But here's where things get disturbing. Even as a child, Elizabeth was already showing signs of her future brutality. She would reportedly watch executions with fascination, studying the faces of dying prisoners with an intensity that unsettled even hardened soldiers. While other kids played with dolls, Elizabeth was apparently taking mental notes on creative ways to cause suffering. The marriage to Nadasdy in 1575 sealed her fate. He was frequently away fighting Ottoman wars, leaving Elizabeth alone in their remote castle with unlimited power over hundreds of servants and peasants. Nadasdy himself was notorious for his battlefield cruelty. He would impale captured enemies and leave them to die slowly. Some historians believe he taught Elizabeth new torture techniques during his brief visits home. What a romantic couple, right? Most newlyweds exchange recipes. These two exchanged methods of inflicting maximum pain. But Elizabeth wasn't just learning from her husband, she was innovating. While Nadasdy's cruelty was tactical, Elizabeth's was personal. She began experimenting with torture methods on her own servants, claiming they were punishments for minor infractions. A dropped plate could result in hours of agony. A late arrival could mean death. Talk about having impossible workplace standards. Her servants couldn't escape or report her. They were essentially prisoners in a remote castle, miles from any authority who might care about their welfare. Elizabeth had created the perfect laboratory for sadism, and she was just getting started. When Ferenc Nadasdy died in 1604, Elizabeth was finally free to pursue her darkest impulses without any oversight. She was 44 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and completely unsupervised. The real horror was about to begin. Sate Castle became Elizabeth's house of horrors, but what happened inside those walls was so systematic and calculated that it would make modern serial killers look like amateurs. Elizabeth didn't just kill randomly, she had a recruitment system. Her servants would travel to surrounding villages, promising young peasant girls jobs as maids in the castle. Good pay, warm beds, and regular meals were rare luxuries for poor families. Parents would actually thank Elizabeth's recruiters for giving their daughters such opportunities. These girls had no idea they were walking into a death trap. Once inside the castle walls, there was no escape. The castle sat on a remote hilltop, surrounded by dense forests and loyal guards. Even if someone managed to flee, where could they go? Elizabeth controlled everything for miles around. The torture chamber was Elizabeth's masterpiece of cruelty. She had it specially designed with devices that would maximize pain while keeping victims alive as long as possible. Elizabeth invented her own methods. She would force girls to stand naked in the snow until they froze, then pour boiling water over their bodies to watch their skin peel off. Elizabeth was methodical. She kept detailed records of her victims, noting their ages, where they came from, and which torture methods worked best. She was studying pain the way other scholars studied mathematics. The blood rituals started small. Elizabeth noticed that when she struck a servant and drew blood, the skin where the blood touched seemed softer. Whether this was real or imagined didn't matter. Elizabeth became obsessed with the idea that young blood could restore her youth. She began collecting it in bathtubs, convinced she had discovered the fountain of youth. Her inner circle of servants became willing accomplices. They helped Elizabeth torture and kill either from fear or because they genuinely enjoyed the cruelty. They would help drain the blood, dispose of bodies, and recruit new victims. Elizabeth had created a murder factory with herself as the CEO of carnage. The disposal system was equally horrific. Bodies were buried in the castle grounds, thrown into nearby rivers, or simply left in the surrounding forest for wolves. Elizabeth treated human remains like household garbage. Some estimates suggest over 600 girls died in Bathe Castle, but the true number will never be known because Elizabeth was so efficient at making people disappear. Elizabeth's growing obsession with her appearance and a twisted interpretation of medieval medicine made her addicted to bloodbaths. In the 16th century, blood was considered the source of life and vitality. Elizabeth took these ideas and warped them into something monstrous. She convinced herself that if drinking animal blood could cure illness, then bathing in human blood could cure aging. The transformation from occasional torture to systematic blood harvesting happened gradually. Elizabeth would examine herself obsessively in mirrors, searching for new wrinkles or gray hairs. Every sign of aging sent her into violent rages. She began timing her torture sessions with her beauty routines, convinced that fresher blood would be more effective. Her method was horrifyingly precise. Victims would be suspended upside down and drained like livestock. Elizabeth would bathe in the warm blood immediately, believing that heat enhanced its youth-preserving properties. She even had special bathtubs installed in her chambers, designed specifically for these blood rituals. But Elizabeth's obsession went beyond just bathing. She would drink the blood of particularly young victims, believing it would work from inside her body as well. She mixed blood with wine and consumed it like a twisted communion. Some accounts suggest she even had blood puddings prepared by her cook, turning cannibalism into cuisine. The psychological aspect was just as disturbing as the physical. Elizabeth genuinely believed she was becoming younger. Her mirrors were specially made to flatter her appearance, and her servants were trained to constantly compliment her youthful looks. She created an echo chamber of delusion, where her horrific crimes seemed justified by imaginary results, like the Instagram today. Medieval society's beliefs about virginity made young girls the perfect targets. Virgin blood was considered the purest and most powerful. Elizabeth specifically targeted girls between 12 and 18 years old, believing their blood contained the strongest life force. The younger the victim, the more potent she imagined the anti-aging effects would be. What makes this even more chilling is that Elizabeth wasn't alone in these beliefs. Several other European nobles of the time practiced similar blood rituals, though none took it to her extreme. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but Elizabeth Bathory essentially created the template for every vampire legend that followed. Her obsession with blood, youth, and immortality became the foundation for centuries of horror stories. For over 2 decades, Elizabeth Bathory murdered hundreds of girls, and almost nobody tried to stop her. This wasn't because people didn't know. It was because she had built the perfect protection system using wealth, power, and fear. Elizabeth's first line of defense was her social status. She was related to the King of Poland, connected to Hungarian royalty, and controlled vast territories. In the 16th century Europe, nobility could literally get away with murder. Peasants had no legal rights, and their deaths were considered property damage at worst. Some things never change, apparently. Local officials were either bought off or terrified into silence. Elizabeth regularly paid bribes to sheriffs, judges, and church leaders. Those who couldn't be bought were intimidated through threats or mysterious accidents. Several investigators who got too close to the truth simply disappeared, and everyone understood the message. The Catholic Church played a crucial role in the cover-up. Elizabeth made massive donations to local parishes and monasteries, essentially purchasing religious protection. Priests would refuse to investigate reports about the castle, claiming it was God's will to respect noble authority. Some even blessed Elizabeth's activities, convinced by her generous contributions that she was a devout Christian. Her servants became unwilling accomplices through a combination of terror and rewards. Those who participated in the murders were given special privileges and protection. Those who showed reluctance faced torture or death themselves. Elizabeth created a loyalty system where staying silent meant survival, and speaking out meant joining the victim count. The disposal network extended far beyond the castle walls. Elizabeth had arrangements with local gravediggers, wagon drivers, and even some village leaders to help conceal evidence. Bodies were scattered across multiple locations, making it impossible to estimate the true death toll. Some were buried in consecrated ground using forged church documents. Family connections provided the ultimate shield. Elizabeth's cousin was Cardinal Andras Bathory, one of the most powerful religious figures in Hungary. Her nephew held important government positions. When rumors reached high-level officials, they were quickly suppressed by family influence. The Bathory name carried more weight than hundreds of peasant lives. But Elizabeth's protection system had a fatal weakness. She got overconfident. As the years passed, she began targeting girls from minor noble families, not just peasants. These families had connections, legal standing, and the resources to demand investigations. When aristocratic daughters started disappearing, even Elizabeth's wealth and status couldn't silence the growing outrage. Those families couldn't be silenced with bribes or threats. They had access to King Matthias himself. The investigation began quietly. King Matthias ordered György Thurzo, Elizabeth's own cousin and the Palatine of Hungary, to look into the rumors. This was supposed to be another cover-up, but Thurzo discovered something that shocked even him. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and absolutely horrific. In December 1610, Thurzo and his soldiers arrived at Chait Castle unannounced. What they found inside defied imagination. Fresh corpses were scattered throughout the castle. Torture devices were still covered in blood. The walls were stained with decades of carnage. In the dungeons, they discovered girls who were still alive but horribly mutilated, barely clinging to life. The testimonies from survivors and witnesses painted a picture of systematic horror. Anna Hedviga, one of the few survivors, described how Elizabeth would bite chunks of flesh from girls' faces and shoulders. But here's where politics trumped justice. Elizabeth was too well connected to execute publicly. A trial would expose the corruption that had protected her for decades, implicating church officials, local authorities, and even royal family members. The Habsburg monarchy couldn't afford that kind of scandal. The solution was elegant and cruel. Elizabeth's servants were executed publicly, tortured and burned alive to satisfy public outrage. But Elizabeth herself never faced trial. Instead, she was sentenced to life imprisonment in her own castle, walled up alive in a small room with only slots for food and air. Elizabeth Bathory spent her final 4 years in complete isolation, gradually going insane in her stone prison. She died in 1614, alone and forgotten, but even in death she avoided the public justice her victims deserved. The final insult? Her family kept most of their wealth and properties. The Bathory name survived, while the names of her hundreds of victims were lost to history. The Blood Countess became the template for every vampire legend that followed, inspiring centuries of horror stories about aristocrats who fed on human blood to maintain eternal youth. But beyond the fictional monsters she inspired, Elizabeth's real legacy is far more disturbing. She proved that wealth and power can protect almost anyone from almost anything. For over 2 decades, hundreds of girls died horrible deaths while authorities looked the other way, and the systems that enabled her crimes barely changed after her death. The most chilling aspect of Elizabeth Bathory's story isn't the bloodbaths or the torture chambers. It's how normal it seemed to everyone around her. The next time you hear about powerful people escaping consequences for their crimes, remember Elizabeth Bathory. Some things haven't changed as much as we'd like to think. History has a way of repeating itself, especially when we forget its darkest lessons. What other historical monsters have been hiding in plain sight? Subscribe to discover the shocking truths that powerful people tried to bury forever.